Hello.
Robots.txt is the guide that we give to Google to tell them what pages to index. Now, something that came up recently is that can actually be indexed itself by Google. So it's something to be aware of, and it's been covered by Search Engine Journal and some of the other sites. You want to make sure that this is all put together and in place as guidance as to what you want Google to index. Now, I also think that you should also do the XML sitemap, but both tactics are recommended. SEM stands for Search Engine Marketing. That means paid advertising. This is one of those terms that if you misuse it, you're really going to nuke your chances for a job or for credibility or for the person trusting that you know what you talked about. So when we talk about SEM, it's always a paid approach. Now, it's no longer enough just to do search engine optimization. SEM is now a critical effort because there's so much competition in search that there's no guarantee based on the algorithms that you'll be able to get up to the top of the first page. So being able to be smart with our search engine marketing, which you have learned about through the Google Search certification and the materials I presented in class, is really critical to cutting through all the clutter. So search engine optimization helps with organic search. It's absolutely critical that you do not confuse it or swap the terms around with SEM. They're two separate strategies. Now, I often hear people say, I'm going to do SEO. Well, you're not really doing SEO as a task. It's an ongoing process, and it's definitely not something that Google automates for you. That's something I've seen in some of the writing that I've reviewed. It requires constant monitoring of search engine expert sources to understand algorithm changes. You want to know a super easy way to keep up with this? Twitter is actually a fantastic way to keep up with the changes in the search engine industry. You can follow all the good sources like Moz, Search Engine Journal, etc., and see what changes are happening, what the experts are finding. And it's always good to follow the blog from Google Webmasters, but if you need something a little less technical, the guidance from those sites are really useful. And a good way to organize that is by putting everyone in a list, and you can just check your list on Twitter and see what the latest updates are. So there are things that you need to do to help with your friendliness towards the search engine. So you've got the front end where the consumer sees incredible visuals, it's appealing to them, but it's just as important on what's on the back end. So you have site design choices like your sitemap, how easy it's organized, your metadata and keywords on the back end, and how dense they are, or if you've keyword stuffed. The XML sitemap, which is different than the organization of your site that you use for information architecture, but it's the file that is used to upload to Google to say these are the pages within our site. And then signals of content quality by user-generated content and inbound links. And remember, if it's a low-quality link coming in, then you can be penalized for it. And Google looks to see if you're buying spammy links or driving just low-quality content. So there are a lot of different things that can lead into your SEO efforts. But one of the things I will say is it requires a lot of effort. It requires a lot of consciously monitoring what's happening out in the marketplace. I would say one of the best places to do research would be with Moz. So at the widest, we start off with crawl accessibility to make sure that your site can be crawled. Those are essential to rankings. You've got to have compelling content. Remember, Google looks at, do you have the content that answers the query? Keyword optimized to attract searchers in the engines to make sure that you've got the right signals out there. User experience, does it load? Does it work on any device? Is it easy to use? Are you going to get that amplification with those links? Is it going to be shared? The title, URL, and description to do the higher click-through ranks. Of course, you need to do that for your paid efforts as well. And then snippet and schema markup. Do you have the right type of information on the back end so that if Google decides that your content is quality, they'll actually do one of those featured snippets up top that they say, hey, this is good content, this is an expert source, we're going to feature it because it'll answer most of the queries on this. So those are the 7 steps that they recommend. Now, that's a lot. So if you are wanting to have an incredible career in digital, one of the best ways to do it is search. But it requires that you are on top of your game all the time with what the trends are and what the algorithm changes are. So, final comment. Do not confuse SEO and SEM. SEO is not something that Google does for you. It's something that you do proactively with the code on your site, with the quality of your content, with your linking strategy. And it really has to tie in to the foundation of your overall digital strategy. Siloed data means that we have databases that are separate from one another when combined or integrated or available in one interface would give us greater visibility into the customer. Remember, we want a 360-degree view of the customer so that we can treat them in the way that they want to be treated. We want to have insight into the value that they provide to us as a customer and also reduce their friction in their customer journey. So, it is one of the greatest challenges. It has been expensive in the past, but it's getting much more accessible. If you're using a marketing cloud like Salesforce Marketing Cloud or Adobe Experience Cloud, one of the key functions is data integration. And you'll also see a lot of comments about DMPs. DMPs are data management platforms, and that's where all of these would interface. So there are different ways to get all this data put together. Remember, internally, we want to provide the right information to the right person in the company at the right time, but only in the correct doses. We don't want them to have access to all the customer information, particularly with the concerns around customer privacy and data that have really come to light in the last few months. So, siloed data is one of our biggest challenges as modern marketers. So here's a term you don't hear all that often, but a slug is part of the URL. So we have www.website.com/ and everything after that is the slug. We should have some optimization on that, and it should provide insight into the content of the page for consumers. Let's find out more about the impact to SEO.
We had a question come in that probably belongs in the Yoast SEO Basics category. What's a slug? What's the difference with a URL? And what is the SEO benefit of a slug? Slug is actually a word that comes from the WordPress community. A slug is the piece of a URL that distinguishes that post. So if you have yoast.com/WordPress SEO, the URL for our WordPress SEO article, then WordPress SEO is the bit that identifies that page as being our WordPress SEO article. It's what our system uses to recognize that it has to serve you that specific page. So it's the defining part of the URL. The SEO benefit of a slug is that you can change the words in there and make sure that it has the words that you really want to rank for, because it's one of the indicators to Google of what a page is about. It's also one of the things that people see in the search results. So if you see in the search results 10 different URLs underneath each other about a certain topic, like WordPress SEO, and you see ours, yoast.com/WordPress SEO, that's very on point, and people might click on that a lot easier than if it's at yoast.com/P equals 613458, which is the old default of WordPress. So that's what a slug is and why it has an SEO benefit. Good luck.
A lot of times you will hear the term single sign-on. So one of the reasons why this matters is that often we're moving between domains or subdomains, and we only want the consumer to sign in once. So single sign-on consists of a username and password that provides access to the entire site. If there's a white label partner or a third party that has a commercial venture that looks like your site, the best practice is to pass the session data, that username and password, and maintain the login. Now, in some cases, this often doesn't happen. So we've seen examples of Ritz-Carlton. If you click off to go and purchase a mattress from them, that single sign-on doesn't carry over. However, if you're on the American Express website and you've been looking at your card account, and you click travel and go off to book a flight or a cruise, that single sign-on does carry over. If categories exist, such as if you're at a bank, banking, savings, credit card, the single login should access all. Single sign-on sounds really simple, but there's a lot going on behind the scenes around passing session data and maintaining that login. And if you've ever been on a site where when you click on something and suddenly it asks you to log in again, their single sign-on hasn't maintained that session and you've suddenly had friction introduced into your customer journey. So single sign-on, fairly complicated on the web side, should be seamless for the consumer side. So if you hear SSO, that's what that means. Now, this is a term that I have heard people in industry confuse back when I was at the agency. I haven't heard any MSM students confuse this. And the reason why you see the shruggy over there is because at this point in the recording, I've run out of clever images to put. But unique visitors is different than the total site visits because that takes into account when people visit multiple times. The unique visitors is just the unique number of people who have visited the site, and it eliminates any of their multiple visits. So it's an important measure. Here's something you've definitely seen, but you may not have realized what it's called or what it actually does. I'm talking about the urchin tag. If you ever see a URL that has UTM in the back of it, that is really an addition to a URL which gives us an idea of from which site or which property did the web visitor come from. So it was originally named for Urchin, a web tracking company that Google purchased a while back. And I've given you an example here of a HubSpot URL that uses the Urchin tag. So you'll see that it has the name of the title followed by a question mark, and then it says UTM campaign _ campaign equals, and then more information there. It's pretty easy to do this through content management sources such as the content management tool inside HubSpot. And if you want to learn more, there's some really great resources on how urchin tags work. Okay, so I've got to be really honest here. I said that this was the language of digital A to Z, but it's really A to X because I couldn't think of a Z. So, but that didn't sound as good. So, okay, confession time. I told you this was the language of digital from A to Z. It's really from A to X, but that didn't sound as good. So I want to end with XML sitemaps. I've touched on it briefly, but it's a document we upload to Google to help it crawl the website the way the owner wishes. It can be created manually. You can put it together, or there are a ton of third-party tools, and Google even gives you a list of those at their website. Now, you can submit what you want to have crawled on your website through robots.txt, or you could do this through the Google Search Console. And this is distinct from what we do with the information architecture sitemaps for design and client review. Remember, those are box and line diagrams. This really is about a list of pages. So an XML sitemap is an important tool. There are a lot of ways to put it together, and it will help with your indexing. An important part of the planning process is the wireframe. Now, a wireframe is not the same as a design comp. It's basically a diagram of a web page with a focus on the key user actions and usability. Now, I will tell you that wireframes can be some of the most difficult things to present to clients because they think that exactly where an item is what it's going to look like. It typically looks like a blueprint. In the past, it's been done in Visio, but it can be done in a lot of other programs now. But today we can do a higher fidelity type of wireframe where it's clickable and would actually show where individual links would go to. That's much easier for client presentations. And now that it's pretty straightforward to have design comps and look and feel built in, that's really a better option. But it's one of those things where we would often sit with the client and show them the wireframes and explain how it would work. This is typically done by a user experience designer or an information architect who's trained on usability and how users actually use websites in various browsers and different types of technology.
Hi, I'm Ben Rowe, and in this video I'll be talking about wireframes, what they are, the different types of wireframes that you can create, and some practical advice about how to improve your wireframes. But first things first, what is a wireframe? Well, a wireframe is like an architect's drawing. It's a draft visual representation of your user interface, and you can use wireframes to communicate four things: the structure of your navigation and information architecture, the layout, including page hierarchy and the placement of elements on the screen, the content. Wireframes give content writers an idea of how their content will be placed within the design, and the functionality. Wireframes can describe how your product will work and how it interacts with the people using it. Wireframes are an indispensable tool in any UX designer's toolkit, and they come in handy in many situations. They can be created at varying levels of fidelity, and this is what makes them so powerful. At the low fidelity end, you have the hand-drawn sketch. Sketches are a great way to flesh out ideas on your own or with your team. They're fast to create and quick to iterate on. And it doesn't matter if you're not great at sketching. Anyone who can draw a square, a circle, and a triangle is perfectly capable of creating a sketch. Next, we have the more traditional wireframe. Now, there are literally hundreds of tools that we can use to create these, but Balsamiq, OmniGraffle, Illustrator, and UX Pin are just some of these. Wireframes like this allow you to communicate your idea to your team, your clients, and your stakeholders. They can be very useful to explain your product and exactly what you're building. At the high fidelity end of the spectrum, a clickable prototype lets you design interactions and user flow. Clickable prototypes are the way to go when conducting usability testing. You could use Exua, Keynote, or even create wireframes directly into the browser using HTML with the help of frameworks such as Bootstrap or Foundation. Sometimes a quick sketch is all you need. Other times, an annotated wireframe is more appropriate. It really depends on the project and the stage you're at. Your wireframe should convey just the right amount of detail and no more. So here are a few practical tips to keep in mind when you're wireframing. 1. Keep them simple. The key to wireframing is speed and simplicity. We'll ultimately throw our wireframes out, so in most cases they don't need to be highly polished or pixel perfect. 2. Use a grid. Grids create structure and simplicity to your layouts. Every decent website these days is built on a grid, so make sure you are using one in your wireframes too. 3. Use short, sharp annotations. Unlike a 50-page functional spec doc, team members actually read wireframes more than any other document, so make sure you keep adding some annotations to your wireframes. Don't go overboard though, keep them brief and to the point. And 4. Encourage feedback. Sharing your wireframes and encouraging feedback from your team members is a surefire way to improve them. So stick your wireframes up on the nearest wall and encourage your team and anyone else to give you feedback. As you can see, wireframes can be easy to create, but it does take some experience to understand when and how to get the most out of them. As with most things, practice makes perfect.
Now, did I leave off any terms? Yes, I did. We would have been here another 8 weeks if I'd gone through every single term in digital. But I really wanted you from a site and search standpoint to understand the language that we're using. As I've read some of the writing this semester, I found that sometimes the terms had nuances that perhaps hadn't been portrayed as richly as they could be. I hope that you take away an idea of how important the terms are, and it's super easy to find listings of terms out on the internet. I also recommend that you go back and look at the Gartner Digital Transit Map, because that will also give you further definitions into some of the more granular tactics that are emerging in the marketplace. Remember, it's very important that we use our language precisely and in a way that others can understand us. It builds credibility, and it also helps the people around us understand what we're saying. Now we're getting into the really fun part of the semester. We'll start talking about mobile, social, and some of the really emerging cool trends like artificial intelligence, augmented reality, virtual reality. So thanks for sticking through Digital A2Z.